They say a man's strength lies in his ability to remain calm under pressure. But let me tell you something. It's not calm that defines you in moments of betrayal. It's what you do with the fire raging inside. I've spent my life solving problems, facing challenges head-on, and protecting the people I love. I never thought I'd have to protect myself from the person I trusted most. My name is Ethan Parker. For 13 years, I believed in my marriage to Rachel. I worked hard as a senior electronics engineer, and I was proud of the life we'd built. We had a beautiful home, 2 wonderful kids, Chloe 8 and Logan 6, and a marriage I thought was unshakable. Rachel had ambition. She was a top real estate agent in our area, always on the move, always closing deals. I admired her drive, even when it meant late nights and weekend showings. We were a team. I trusted her completely. But trust is a funny thing. It's a one-way street, easy to travel down when you think you're going in the same direction. When you realize you're alone, it's a long walk back. The cracks started small. Rachel began staying out later than usual, throwing around excuses like an important open house or a last-minute showing. I didn't think much of it at first. She was good at what she did, and her success was a point of pride for both of us. But then I started noticing changes. Her phone, once an afterthought she'd leave on the kitchen counter, became a constant companion. If I walked into the room, she'd lock it and flash me a quick smile, as if daring me to ask why. She started wearing a perfume I didn't recognize, something bold and unfamiliar. When I joked about it, she brushed it off with a wink and said, "Keeping it fresh." I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm not the type to ignore warning signs either. The tipping point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed. It was the school nurse, letting me know Chloe wasn't feeling well and needed to be picked up. Rachel was closer, so I called her first. No answer. I tried her office line, nothing. Fine, I thought. I'll handle it. When I pulled into our driveway with Chloe asleep in the back seat, I saw something that stopped me cold. A sleek black sedan was parked in the garage, right next to Rachel's car. My mind immediately went on high alert. That wasn't our car. That wasn't a friend's car. That was a problem. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. My jaw clenched. Chloe stirred in the back seat, and I knew I couldn't bring her inside if my suspicions were right. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Let's wait here for a minute. I think the pest guy left some chemicals inside, and I don't want you to breathe that stuff in." Chloe groaned, rubbing her eyes. "Okay, Daddy." I stepped out of the car, shutting the door softly behind me. The house was too quiet. From upstairs, I heard muffled voices. A man's laugh, low and familiar. Then Rachel's, high-pitched and cheerful. My fists clenched, my pulse pounding in my ears. My first instinct was to storm upstairs, throw the door open, and deal with the situation head-on. But I forced myself to stop. Chloe was in the car, and I wasn't about to blow up her world without proof. So I backed away. I drove Chloe to my mother's house, masking my anger with a forced calm. "Grandma's going to take care of you for a bit," I told her. "Daddy has some things to handle." Once she was safe, I made a beeline back to the house, but the black sedan was gone. When Rachel got home that evening, all smiles and cheer, I was already on edge. "Hey, babe," she said, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. "How's Chloe? Did you pick her up okay?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone flat. "She's at Mom's." I didn't mention the car. I didn't ask who she was with. Instead, I watched her closely, waiting for any sign that she was rattled. She wasn't. I knew I needed answers, and I wasn't about to sit around playing guessing games. The next morning, I called Dan Carter, a longtime colleague in the security division. Dan's the kind of guy who doesn't ask questions, but when I told him I needed help, he immediately agreed. "Ethan," he said when we met, "you look like you're ready to go to war." "You have no idea," I said. "Some men crumble under the weight of betrayal. Others pick up the pieces and turn them into weapons." I wasn't about to let Rachel's deceit break me. After seeing that black sedan in my garage and hearing their laughter, I knew I couldn't afford a rash move. Chloe was my priority, and dragging her into whatever was going on upstairs wasn't an option. But don't mistake my restraint for weakness. I walked away that day, but I walked away with a purpose. I called Dan Carter the next morning. Dan's not just a colleague. He's a problem solver. Dan, I said as soon as he answered. I need your help. What's going on? I think Rachel's cheating on me, I said, cutting straight to the point. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then Dan said, What do you need? We met later that afternoon in my office. I laid out everything I'd seen and heard. Rachel's late nights, her sudden secrecy, the car in the garage. Dan didn't waste time asking why I hadn't confronted her. He knew I wanted proof, something undeniable. We'll set up cameras and microphones, he said. Miniature, wireless, motion-activated. You'll get clear audio and video right to your laptop. What about her car? I asked. Dan thought for a moment. I've got a voice-activated recorder you can slip under the seat. It'll catch her side of any phone call she makes while driving. Perfect, I said, my fists tightening at the thought of what I might hear. By the time we were done, my house was rigged like a surveillance operation. We placed cameras in the bedroom, the kitchen, and the living room. I made sure the bedroom had multiple angles. I didn't want her or her lover having any room to hide. The system was set to trigger with motion, automatically recording audio and video whenever someone entered the room. The microphone in the living room was discreetly hidden in a corner lamp, while the kitchen's was concealed in a smoke detector. For her car, I waited until the next morning. As soon as Rachel left to drop the kids at school, I slipped the recorder under the driver's seat. Now all I had to do was wait. That night, I reviewed the first set of footage. It didn't take long. Around 1 p.m., Rachel came home with Michael Evans. They wasted no time. First, they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my kids eat breakfast every morning, and leaned close, their voices low but unmistakable. Michael laughed, his hand brushing Rachel's. She giggled like a schoolgirl. You're incredible, she said, her voice dripping with admiration. Michael smirked. Well, your husband doesn't seem to notice, does he? No, Rachel said, shaking her head. He's so predictable. I could tell him I'm working late every night, and he'd believe it. My jaw clenched as I watched Michael lean in and kiss her. After their little meeting in the kitchen, they moved upstairs. The bedroom camera caught everything. I won't go into the details. They're burned into my memory, but suffice it to say, there was no mistaking what was happening. And the worst part? Their conversation afterward. Rachel lay on her side, facing Michael, her hand resting on his chest. He's a good provider, she said, but he doesn't excite me the way you do. Michael laughed. He's a chump. You deserve someone who can match your energy. I slammed my laptop shut, my knuckles white against the edge of the desk. My blood boiled, but I wasn't about to let them win. The next day, I checked the recorder from Rachel's car. Michael, Rachel's voice purred. Yesterday was amazing. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, though. Ethan's been acting strange lately. You think he knows? Michael asked, his tone casual. No, Rachel said quickly. He's too trusting. But I can't take any chances. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The following week, Rachel scheduled another open house. I didn't ask where she was going. I already knew. At 12:45, Michael's black sedan pulled into my garage. 5 minutes later, Rachel arrived. I watched from the van I'd parked down the street, my fists clenched as they walked inside, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. They were comfortable, careless. They didn't think twice about what might be coming. But I was done waiting. They say betrayal doesn't destroy you all at once. It breaks you piece by piece, every lie chipping away until there's nothing left but anger. That anger, that fire, is what kept me focused. I wasn't going to let Rachel and Michael get away with what they'd done. The surveillance I set up captured everything I needed, but the reality of seeing it, hearing it, was more painful than I'd anticipated. Their second meeting at my house was even more brazen than the first. Michael pulled into my garage like he belonged there, taking my spot next to Rachel's car. She arrived minutes later, walking inside as if it was just another day at work. I sat in the van parked down the street, my jaw tightening as they entered the house together. They didn't bother pulling the curtains or lowering their voices. They laughed, their movements casual, completely unbothered. In the living room, Michael made himself at home, slouching on the couch with a smug grin. "We should try the kids' rooms," Michael joked, his tone casual, but with a hint of suggestion. Rachel's expression shifted. "Absolutely not. That's off limits." "Oh, come on," he teased. "You're no fun." Rachel shook her head firmly. "No, this is our space, not theirs." I should have felt some relief that Rachel had drawn a line, but instead, it made my stomach churn. What kind of person shows respect for their children's rooms while shamelessly desecrating every other corner of the house? When I reviewed the footage later that night, the true depth of their betrayal hit me. It started in the kitchen. The table where I ate breakfast with Chloe and Logan every morning became their playground. Michael sat at one end, leaning forward to kiss Rachel as she straddled the chair opposite him. "That's the best part about your husband," Michael said, his tone dripping with mockery. "He's so predictable. Probably sitting at work right now, completely clueless." Rachel laughed, running a finger along the edge of the table. "He has no idea. I could probably leave my phone unlocked in front of him, and he'd still miss it." Michael smirked. "You've got him wrapped around your finger." "Completely," Rachel replied, her voice laced with satisfaction. They kissed again before moving upstairs to the bedroom. I won't describe what the cameras captured there. The images are seared into my memory, and I wouldn't wish them on anyone. But it wasn't just the physical betrayal that gutted me. It was their conversation afterward. Lying on the bed, Rachel rested her head on Michael's chest, her voice soft but clear. "Sometimes I feel bad," she admitted. "For what?" Michael asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "For leading him on," Rachel said. "Ethan's a good man, but I need more. I need this." Michael chuckled. "You mean me?" Rachel smiled, her hand tracing lazy circles on his chest. "Yeah, I need you." I shut the laptop, the images and words burned into my mind. My fists clenched as I sat there in silence, breathing heavily. The next morning, I checked the recorder in Rachel's car. The first conversation confirmed what I already knew. "Michael," Rachel said, her tone soft and affectionate. "Yesterday was amazing. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, though. Ethan's been acting strange lately." "You think he knows?" Michael asked, his voice calm, almost bored. "No," Rachel said quickly. "He's too trusting. But I can't take any chances." The second conversation was worse. "I wish we could just be together all the time," Rachel said wistfully. "Ethan's a good provider, but he's so boring. You make me feel alive." Michael chuckled. "You're not exactly stuck. Divorce isn't the end of the world." "You don't understand," Rachel replied. "He's the father of my kids. He's safe." Safe. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. To her, I wasn't a husband or a partner. I was a safety net. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours compiling the evidence. I chose the clearest stills from the recordings, each one capturing Rachel and Michael in unmistakable acts. I wrote a letter to Michael's wife, Jennifer, detailing their affair and enclosing copies of the photos. I also drafted letters to the partners at Michael's real estate firm. They needed to know what kind of man they were employing. The next morning, I sent the letters to be delivered by courier. Their third meeting at the house played out like clockwork. By now, I knew their routine. Michael's black sedan rolled into my driveway at 12:45. Rachel arrived minutes later, parking next to him as usual. This time, I didn't watch from the van. I parked nearby, out of sight, and waited for them to finish. By 2:30, Michael was backing out of the driveway, looking smug as ever. Rachel followed 15 minutes later, her makeup freshly touched up. I pulled into the garage as soon as they were gone. The footage was more of the same, but by now I was numb to it. I didn't need to watch every detail. I just needed to make sure the cameras had captured everything clearly. Once I confirmed the recordings were intact, I set to work. The bed, the kitchen table, and the living room rug, every piece of furniture they'd defiled, was dragged out onto the front lawn. I moved slowly, methodically, as if I were preparing for a gallery exhibition. Each item was labeled with a sign, "Free to a good home, if you can stomach the stench of infidelity." On the bed, I attached a sign that read, "Where Rachel and Michael spent 6 months betraying me." The kitchen table bore another, where they laughed about how stupid I was. Behind the furniture, I placed a larger sign detailing their affair, complete with explicit photos blown up to 17 by 24 inches. By the time I was done, the display was impossible to miss. I stepped back, taking in the sight. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. Now all I had to do was wait. When I stepped back to survey the scene, a strange calm settled over me. The bed, the kitchen table, the rug, everything was laid out neatly on the lawn. The signs I'd made flapped slightly in the afternoon breeze, their words impossible to miss. Neighbors were already stopping to stare, their eyes widening as they read the details. Some whispered, some pointed, and a few even pulled out their phones to snap pictures. Cars slowed to a crawl as drivers tried to make sense of the spectacle. It was 4:55 p.m. Rachel would be home any minute. At exactly 5 o'clock, Rachel's car turned the corner. I stepped back toward the house, standing just inside the front window, where I could watch the scene unfold. She slowed as she approached, her eyes darting from the growing crowd to the furniture on the lawn. Her confusion turned to horror as she recognized the bed, the table, the rug. Then her gaze moved to the signs. Her car jerked to a stop in the middle of the street. I could see her face clearly through the windshield. Pale, wide-eyed, her mouth moving soundlessly as she read the words. Free to a good home. If you can stomach the stench of infidelity. Where Rachel and Michael spent 6 months betraying me. Where they mocked my trust and laughed about their lies. And then the photos. The enlarged images of her and Michael were impossible to miss. They captured every damning detail. The stolen kisses, the smug smiles, the moments of passion that had taken place in my home, on my furniture. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth as she let out a strangled cry. No. Oh, God, no. By now, the crowd had grown to at least 40 or 50 people. Neighbors, passers-by, even teenagers from down the block stood watching the drama unfold. Rachel finally seemed to notice the crowd, her eyes darting around as tears began to stream down her face. She looked like a trapped animal, panicked and desperate. Her gaze shifted toward the house, and then she saw me. We locked eyes through the window. Her face crumpled, as if she were silently pleading with me to stop this. I didn't move. Rachel stumbled out of the car, her legs unsteady as she tried to approach the lawn. Ethan, she called out, her voice cracking. Please, we can talk about this. Please, just... Her words were drowned out by the murmurs and gasps of the crowd. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, my expression calm. Talk about what, Rachel? I asked, my voice carrying over the silence that had fallen. The 6 months you spent lying to me? Sneaking around with Michael? Mocking me behind my back? She froze, her hands trembling as she tried to speak. Ethan, I didn't mean... You didn't mean what? I cut her off, my tone sharp. You didn't mean to get caught? Or you didn't mean for everyone to find out what kind of woman you really are? Her lips quivered, but no sound came out. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their eyes bouncing between us like spectators at a tennis match. You made your choices, I said, my voice low and cold. Now you can live with them. I turned and walked back inside, shutting the door behind me. From the window, I saw Rachel drop to her knees on the lawn, sobbing uncontrollably. A woman from the crowd, a neighbor I barely knew, approached her cautiously, placing a hand on her shoulder. Rachel shrugged it off, burying her face in her hands. Someone in the crowd muttered, I can't believe it. That poor guy. The police arrived around 6:30. I heard the knock on the door and opened it to find 2 officers standing on the porch. Mr. Parker, one of them said, his tone professional but firm, we've had complaints about the display on your lawn. We understand you're going through a difficult time, but this is causing a public disturbance. I nodded. I understand. I'll take it down. The officers looked relieved. Thank you, one of them said. Before closing the door, I glanced back at the lawn. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but a few stragglers remained, taking one last look at the spectacle. Rachel's car was gone. By the time I dismantled the display, the sun had set. I hauled the furniture back into the garage, but I couldn't bring myself to touch the mattress or the stained sheets. I stood there for a moment, staring at the pile. Rachel's sobs, her panic cries. They should have made me feel something. sadness, anger, regret. But all I felt was emptiness. She had brought this on herself. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up with a focus sharper than I'd ever known. For weeks, anger had been my companion, a volatile, searing presence threatening to overtake me. But that morning, the anger was gone, replaced by something far more potent: purpose. Rachel and Michael had destroyed what I held sacred. Now it was time for me to do the same to them. I started with the basics, securing my future and that of my children. I made an appointment with James Carter, a hard-hitting divorce lawyer known for his ruthless efficiency. The kind of man who didn't waste time sugarcoating the truth. When I arrived at his office, James listened to my story without interruption, his expression growing colder as I laid out the details. "Mr. Parker," he said finally, leaning back in his chair, "you're smart to come to me now. This isn't just about ending a marriage. It's about protecting your life and your children from someone who clearly had no regard for either." James wasted no time. Within hours, I'd signed documents removing Rachel as the beneficiary of my life insurance policy and 401k. Chloe and Logan's names now filled that space. My children were my priority, and I wasn't going to risk Rachel benefiting from my hard work after what she'd done. Next, I canceled every joint credit card we had. Rachel's access to our shared finances was severed in minutes. Half the money from our joint accounts went into a separate account in my name, leaving her with no claim to it. When I asked James about custody, he didn't sugarcoat the reality. "You're in a no-fault state, Mr. Parker. Her infidelity won't affect the divorce settlement directly. However, the evidence you've gathered will be invaluable in proving what kind of person she is. If you play this right, we can ensure you get joint custody while limiting her influence." That was all I needed to hear. But protecting myself wasn't enough. I couldn't walk away from this until Michael Evans faced the fallout of his actions. Michael had invaded my home, disrespected my marriage, and humiliated me. He'd flaunted his affair with Rachel as if he were untouchable. That arrogance was about to cost him everything. I spent the next evening drafting 2 letters. The first was addressed to Michael's wife, Jennifer Evans. I laid out every detail of her husband's betrayal, sparing nothing. The letter was accompanied by clear photos from the videos I'd recorded, each one more damning than the last. I ended with a direct statement: "Jennifer, you deserve to know the truth about the man you married. If you need more evidence, I have additional recordings and documents at your disposal. My sympathies go out to you and your children during this difficult time." The second letter was from Michael's firm. I didn't mince words. Their employee handbook explicitly stated that employees engaging in inappropriate relationships that jeopardized the company's reputation would face immediate termination. I outlined Michael's actions in detail, including dates and evidence of how he had conducted his affair with a married colleague on company time. I included photos and closed with a simple ultimatum: "If your firm chooses not to act, I will ensure this story reaches the public. I trust you will do what's necessary." By the time I sealed the envelopes, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The fallout began less than a day after the letters were delivered. Jennifer received hers first. A mutual acquaintance later told me that she'd screamed loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. By that evening, Michael had been thrown out of their home. When Michael showed up to work the next morning, the partners were waiting for him. According to someone at the firm, the meeting lasted less than an hour. The evidence I'd provided left no room for debate. The partners were furious. "You've embarrassed this firm, jeopardized our reputation, and disrespected your colleagues," one of them reportedly told him. "Pack your things. Your time here is over." Michael tried to argue, but it was no use. By the end of the day, he was jobless, homeless, and publicly humiliated. Rachel didn't fare much better. Word of the affair spread quickly, thanks to the scene I'd made on our lawn. Her colleagues at the real estate firm grew distant, treating her with polite indifference while whispering behind her back. Clients began canceling contracts. No one wanted to work with an agent whose name was now synonymous with scandal. She called me that night, her voice trembling with desperation. "Ethan," she said, choking back tears, "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. Please, can we talk? Can we fix this?" I let her words hang in the air for a moment before replying, my tone ice cold. You didn't make a mistake, Rachel. You made a choice, and now you'll live with it. Her sobs on the other end of the line didn't move me. Rachel's social circle evaporated almost overnight. The women she'd once considered friends stopped answering her calls. Her family, while sympathetic on the surface, grew distant, embarrassed by her actions. For the first time in years, Rachel was truly alone. Her career in real estate was over within weeks. Unable to find work in the industry, she took a job as a receptionist at a retirement home. The glamorous lifestyle she'd once flaunted was gone. She moved into a modest apartment, and every time she saw me during custody exchanges, the guilt was written all over her face. Meanwhile, Michael disappeared into obscurity. With no job, no marriage, and no support system, he became a ghost of the man who had once strutted into my home like he owned the place. Jennifer, however, thrived. She filed for divorce immediately and started rebuilding her life. A mutual acquaintance told me she was seeing someone new, a kind, grounded man who treated her with respect. Good for her, I thought. As for me, I focused on my children. Chloe and Logan were too young to understand the full extent of what had happened, but they knew something was different. I made it my mission to shield them from the worst of it, ensuring they felt safe and loved. When Rachel asked to see them, I agreed, but only under strict conditions. Our interactions were cold and formal, limited to logistics about the kids. Every time she tried to bring up our marriage, I shut her down. There's nothing left to say, Rachel, I told her during one exchange. You destroyed what we had. Now I'm making sure our kids don't suffer for it. Her tears meant nothing to me. Watching Rachel and Michael's lives unravel didn't bring me joy, but it did bring me closure. They had made their choices, and I had ensured they faced the consequences. This was justice. This was their reckoning. The fallout from Rachel and Michael's betrayal didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, each one hitting harder than the last. For me, this wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring they faced every consequence of their actions. Jennifer Evans didn't waste any time after receiving the letter. She packed up Michael's belongings and left them on the porch with a note that read, "Don't come back." A neighbor later told me that Michael had shown up that evening, banging on the door and begging to be let in, but Jennifer never opened it. Instead, she filed for divorce the very next day. At work, Michael's humiliation was equally swift. The partners at his real estate firm didn't bother sugarcoating their anger when they confronted him. My letter had done its job, laying out his behavior in explicit detail and providing all the evidence they needed to justify firing him. "You've embarrassed this company," one of them told him. "We trusted you, and you repaid us by dragging our reputation through the mud. Clear out your office." Michael tried to fight back, insisting that his personal life shouldn't affect his job. But the partners didn't budge. By the end of the day, he was out the door, escorted by security, like a common thief. Word spread quickly among his colleagues, and by the time he left, no one even bothered to say goodbye. Michael's dismissal hit harder than he likely anticipated. His real estate career was over. A scandal like this didn't stay quiet, and other firms in the area were well aware of what had happened. Several sources told me he tried to find work at smaller agencies, only to be met with polite rejections. No one wanted the risk of hiring someone who was as much a liability as he was a salesman. Rachel's fall from grace wasn't as public as Michael's, but it was just as brutal. The whispers started the morning after the signs on our lawn went up. By lunchtime, everyone in our neighborhood knew about the affair. Within days, the gossip had reached her real estate firm. I overheard one of her co-workers describe her as radioactive. Clients began canceling their contracts, unwilling to work with an agent whose name had become synonymous with scandal. Her boss, while sympathetic on the surface, couldn't ignore the damage to the firm's reputation. After a tense meeting, Rachel was encouraged to take a leave of absence. She didn't return. Socially, Rachel was abandoned. The women she'd once called friends turned their backs on her. They didn't say it outright, but their silence spoke volumes. Invitations to brunches and parties dried up. Calls went unanswered. Even her family kept their distance. Her parents, who had once adored me, reached out to apologize on Rachel's behalf. "She made a terrible mistake," her mother said during one strained conversation. "But she's still our daughter." I didn't argue. Let them deal with the fallout. I was done. While Rachel and Michael scrambled to pick up the pieces, I focused on securing a stable future for my children. I continued working closely with my lawyer, James, to finalize the divorce. Every step was calculated. Joint custody was a given, but I made sure the terms heavily favored me. Rachel would only see Chloe and Logan on specific days, with no room for negotiation. The house, once a symbol of our family, became a battleground. In the end, I agreed to let Rachel keep it. For one reason, I didn't want to live with the memories of what had happened there. James advised me to keep things practical, but he acknowledged my composure. After signing the final paperwork, he said, "You handled this well, Ethan. Most men would have fallen apart, but you kept your head. That's rare." I didn't feel victorious, but I appreciated his words. The months that followed were a strange mix of freedom and emptiness. For the first time in years, I didn't have to share my space with Rachel. My condo was small but peaceful, free from the lies that had suffocated me. Chloe and Logan adapted quickly, though I knew they felt the shift. I made it my mission to keep their lives as normal as possible. School, soccer practice, bedtime stories. If I could protect them from the worst of this, I would. Rachel, on the other hand, was floundering. She took a job as a receptionist at a retirement home, a far cry from her once thriving real estate career. The glamorous life she'd once flaunted was gone, replaced by something far more modest. Whenever we crossed paths during custody exchanges, I saw the regret in her eyes. She didn't say it outright, but I knew she was haunted by what she'd lost. Michael's fate was even bleaker. With no job, no marriage, and no reputation, he became a ghost. The last I heard, he was living in a cramped apartment downtown, spending his days trying to find work and failing. One night, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Michael had tried to reach out to Rachel, but she had ignored him. Whatever spark they'd shared during their affair had burned out as quickly as it ignited, leaving both of them with nothing but ashes. Jennifer, however, thrived. She finalized her divorce from Michael and started a new chapter, focusing on her kids and her career. A mutual acquaintance told me she was seeing someone new, a kind, grounded man who treated her with the respect she deserved. Good for her, I thought. She deserved better. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the wreckage Rachel and Michael had left behind. I wondered if they regretted it, if they thought about the pain they'd caused. But then I'd remember Rachel's words from the recordings. How she'd called me safe, how she'd mocked my trust. Those words had cut deeper than any action, and they reminded me why I'd done what I did. Betrayal has a cost, and Rachel and Michael had paid it in full. Even now, a year later, I see the ripple effects of their choices. Chloe and Logan are stronger, more resilient, but I still catch glimpses of confusion in their eyes when they ask why mommy and daddy don't live together anymore. I answer them as honestly as I can without pulling back the curtain too far. Mommy and daddy had different ideas about what makes a family, I say, but we both love you very much. It's not the whole truth, but it's enough for now. As for me, I'm still rebuilding. My trust, my confidence, my belief in people, it's all a work in progress. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I've earned my peace, and I intend to keep it. The months following the divorce felt like stepping into a new life, one I hadn't asked for, but had no choice but to embrace. It wasn't easy to pick up the pieces, but I did it for my children, for myself, and for the man I refused to let Rachel and Michael break. Rachel's life had crumbled around her. The reputation she had worked so hard to build was gone. Her former clients had deserted her, and the real estate community, once her playground, now whispered her name like it was a curse. Her job at the retirement home was a far cry from her previous position. The confidence and charm she'd once used to close deals were gone, replaced by quiet resignation. I saw her during custody exchanges, and each time, her face told the same story: regret, sadness, and a hollow realization of what she'd thrown away. Michael wasn't faring any better. His attempts to restart his career had failed miserably. With no firm willing to take a chance on him and his scandal-ridden name, he found himself unemployable. The man who once carried himself with arrogant confidence now seemed to vanish from the public eye. The last I heard, he was scraping by on short-term gigs, far removed from the comfort and stability he once knew. I wasn't keeping tabs on them out of spite. I had moved past that. My focus was on Chloe and Logan. They deserved a father who was strong, steady, and present. While I couldn't shield them from everything, I made sure they knew they were loved and supported. We established new routines, finding joy in the little things, baking cookies on Sunday afternoons, movie nights, and family hikes. But it wasn't just about creating a sense of normalcy for them. I had to rebuild myself as well. There were days when the weight of what happened threatened to pull me under. Trusting someone as deeply as I had trusted Rachel, only to have her betray me, left scars I knew would take time to heal. I stayed single, not out of fear, but because I needed to find peace within myself before letting anyone else into my life. The idea of opening my heart to someone again felt impossible, like a risk I wasn't ready to take. But I didn't let that stop me from growing. The condo I moved into after the divorce was modest but mine. It became a space where I could reflect, plan, and focus on the future. I spent evenings tinkering with projects in the small workspace I set up, losing myself in the simplicity of building something with my hands. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. Rachel, on the other hand, was struggling to find her footing. At one point, she tried to rekindle old friendships, reaching out to people who had distanced themselves after the scandal. Some offered polite sympathy, but most had moved on. She was no longer the charismatic agent who charmed clients and closed deals. She was just a reminder of a messy affair that no one wanted to be associated with. Her relationship with Michael had dissolved almost as quickly as it began. Whatever spark they shared during their affair had been snuffed out by the harsh reality of their choices. Rachel never mentioned him during custody exchanges, and I never asked. From what little I gathered, they had gone their separate ways, each left to deal with the wreckage on their own. The kids adapted better than I expected. Chloe threw herself into soccer, finding a sense of belonging in her team. Logan, ever the curious one, became fascinated with science, spending hours building Lego models and asking me endless questions about how things worked. Their resilience was a reminder of why I couldn't let myself falter. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all caught up with me. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd find myself revisiting the past, not out of longing, but to make sense of how we'd ended up here. The recordings, the photographs, the signs on the lawn, it all felt surreal, like a chapter from someone else's life. Rachel tried to apologize a few times, though her efforts felt half-hearted. She'd call after the kids were asleep, her voice heavy with emotion, but I never gave her what she was looking for. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer, not because I enjoyed holding on to the pain, but because I didn't believe her remorse was about me. It was about her, about the life she'd lost and the reputation she'd destroyed. One night, she asked me if I thought she'd ever redeem herself in the eyes of our children. Her voice cracked as she said, "I know I've hurt them. I just don't want them to hate me." I told her the truth. They don't hate you, Rachel, but they'll grow up knowing what happened. You can't control that. What you can do is be there for them now and show them you care. That's all you can do. She cried, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. But it wasn't enough to erase the damage. Jennifer, on the other hand, had taken her pain and turned it into strength. She finalized her divorce from Michael and began focusing on her children and her career. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she was dating again, and from what I heard, the man she'd met was kind, grounded, and everything Michael wasn't. I couldn't help but feel happy for her. As for me, I kept moving forward one day at a time. I wasn't looking for redemption or closure anymore. I had found my own peace in the routines I built with Chloe and Logan, in the quiet moments when we laughed together or tackled a new project. There's a saying that time heals all wounds, but I don't entirely agree. Time doesn't erase the scars. It just makes them easier to live with. Betrayal leaves a mark, but it doesn't have to define you. Rachel and Michael had made their choices, and they'd paid the price. But I wasn't going to let their mistakes define me or my future. I had a life to build, and I wasn't going to waste another moment looking back. As I sit here now, a year after everything unraveled, I can finally breathe. The pain has dulled, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild the life I deserve. Chloe and Logan are my anchor, their laughter a constant reminder of what truly matters. Rachel remains a distant presence, a shadow of the woman I once loved. We speak only when necessary, and even then, it's brief and cordial. Her life is hers to piece together. I've let go of the anger, the bitterness. It's not about forgiveness. It's about freedom. Michael? I don't think about him. From what I hear, he's still struggling to recover. Good. As for me, I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. I've learned that betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for certain. I'm moving forward one step at a time, with my head held high and my heart guarded but open. For now, that's enough.